He was our foster brother. Not blood. Not really family.
He got too much attention for a foster child.
I have seen the depths of human cruelty, but I have never, until now, witnessed such complete absence of remorse. Ethan Whitmore, Aaron Whitmore, I hereby sentence you both to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
In the summer of 2019, in the quiet suburbs of Franklin County, Ohio, a tragedy unfolded that would shake the nation's conscience and force America to confront uncomfortable truths about family, race, and the darkness that can fester behind closed doors. The courtroom was packed that humid August morning. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on two teenage boys who sat with an unsettling calmness at the defense table. 16-year-old twins Ethan and Aaron Whitmore faced the judge with expressions that seemed to hover between boredom and defiance. Their matching blue polo shirts and khaki pants gave them the appearance of prep school students rather than defendants in a murder trial. What brought them here was the death of 10-year-old Marcus Thompson, their foster brother, whose small body had been found in a wooded area behind their family's sprawling colonial home 3 months earlier. The details that emerged during the trial had horrified even seasoned prosecutors. A pattern of escalating abuse, captured partially on the twins' own phones, that culminated in an act of violence so brutal that several jurors had wept during testimony. But it was what happened in that courtroom in those final moments before sentencing that would become the image seared into America's collective memory. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, Aaron Whitmore turned to his brother and smirked. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but a photographer caught it. That photograph would be on the front page of every major newspaper the next day. Judge Patricia Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the bench known for her measured temperament, paused. She removed her glasses and looked directly at the twins. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that silenced the room. In my 2 decades on this bench, I have seen the depths of human cruelty. But I have never, until now, witnessed such complete absence of remorse. Marcus Thompson was 10 years old. He was defenseless. He looked up to you. And you tortured him. You filmed it. You laughed about it. And even now, facing the consequences of your actions, you show nothing but contempt. The courtroom held its breath. The state of Ohio allows me discretion in sentencing juvenile offenders. I have wrestled with this decision, knowing that you are 16 years old. But the law also requires me to consider the nature of your crime, your character, and the likelihood of rehabilitation. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Based on everything I have seen and heard, I have reached a conclusion. Ethan Whitmore, Aaron Whitmore, I hereby sentence you both to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Life without parole for juveniles was rare, reserved for only the most extreme cases. The twins' mother, Margaret Whitmore, let out a wail and collapsed into her husband's arms. But it was Marcus's biological aunt, Shanice Thompson, who stood in the back of the room with tears streaming down her face, who embodied the complex grief that this case represented. "Thank you," she whispered, though no one heard her over the chaos. But this story doesn't begin in that courtroom. It doesn't even begin with Marcus's death. To understand how 2 teenage boys could become capable of such horror, we need to go back further. We need to understand the home they came from, the parents who raised them, and the subtle poison of inequality that infected every corner of their lives. Before we continue with this story, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear is difficult. It's uncomfortable. It challenges assumptions about family, about love, and about the invisible hierarchies that can exist even in homes that appear perfect from the outside. But these are conversations we must have. If this story affects you, if it makes you angry or sad or forces you to examine your own beliefs about how we treat children, then share it. Talk about it. Because silence is how patterns like this perpetuate. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep dives into cases that matter, cases that reveal something essential about who we are as a society. Hit that notification bell because we're going to follow this story to its conclusion, and we're going to ask the hard questions that many people want to avoid. Now let's go back. Back before the trial, before Marcus's death, before the Whitmore family appeared on the local news as the picture of suburban success. Let's go back to where it all began. The Whitmore family moved into 847 Meadowbrook Lane in the fall of 2016. The house was impressive by any standard. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a finished basement, and a backyard that backed up to a conservation area. Margaret Whitmore, a real estate agent with a practiced smile, had found it herself. Her husband, David Whitmore, a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company, had the income to afford it. Their twin sons, Ethan and Aaron, were 13 then. Identical in appearance but distinct in personality, They had that confidence that comes from never having wanted for anything. Ethan was the more outgoing of the two, quick with a joke, popular at school. Aaron was quieter, more calculating, but no less self-assured. The Whitmores were active in their community. Margaret volunteered with the PDA. David coached youth soccer. They attended church most Sundays. To their neighbors, they embodied the American dream. Hardworking, successful, devoted to family and community. But there was something else about the Whitmores, something that Margaret in particular felt strongly about. She believed in giving back. She had grown up in modest circumstances, had worked her way through college, and she wanted to instill in her sons a sense of gratitude and social responsibility. "We have so much," she told David one evening in early 2017. "I think we should consider fostering. The boys are at a good age. It would teach them empathy, compassion. It would show them how fortunate they are." David was less certain. "It's a big commitment, Maggie. The boys have their activities, we have our work. Are you sure we have the bandwidth?" "We'll make it work," Margaret insisted. "Besides, it's not about convenience. It's about doing the right thing." On the surface, her motivations seemed pure. But human motivation is rarely simple. Margaret wanted to foster, yes, but she also wanted to be seen as the kind of person who fosters. She wanted the recognition, the approval, the sense of moral superiority that comes with conspicuous charity. She never examined this too closely. Few people do. The Whitmores were approved as foster parents in April 2017. The process had been thorough but not thorough enough. The social workers who visited their homes saw the obvious: financial stability, an intact marriage, community involvement, a spacious house. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see in a few supervised visits, was the subtle hierarchy that already existed in the Whitmore household. Ethan and Aaron were the center of everything. Their achievements were celebrated, their disappointments consoled, their preferences accommodated. This wasn't unusual for biological children, but it had created in the twins a sense of primacy, a belief that they were the protagonists of the family story and everyone else was supporting cast. When Margaret told the boys they would be fostering a child, their reactions were telling. "Why?" Aaron asked flatly. "Because we can help someone who needs it," Margaret explained. "There are children who don't have families who need a safe place to stay. We have the room, we have the resources. It's the right thing to do." Ethan shrugged. "Will they have to share our stuff?" "You'll need to share some things, yes. That's part of being in a family." "But it's not really our family," Aaron said. "Right? I mean, they're just staying here temporarily." Margaret hesitated. This was a nuance she hadn't fully considered. "Well, while they're here, they're part of our family. We'll treat them with love and respect." But even in that moment, the distinction had been made. The foster child would be part of the family, but not quite the same as Ethan and Aaron. They were the real children. The foster child would be something else. Marcus Thompson arrived on a humid June evening. He was 7 years old, small for his age, with wide eyes and a backpack that contained everything he owned. His mother was incarcerated on drug charges. His father was unknown. He had no other family able to care for him. The social worker Linda Chen brought him to the door. Margaret answered with her best smile, the one she used for open houses. "You must be Marcus," she said warmly. "We're so happy you're here. Come in, come in." Marcus didn't say anything. He clutched his backpack and followed Linda inside. The Whitmore boys were waiting in the living room, standing side by side like a receiving line. Margaret had insisted they be present for Marcus's arrival, to make him feel welcome. "Marcus, these are my sons Ethan and Aaron." "Boys, say hello." "Hey," Ethan said. Aaron just nodded. Marcus looked at them and then at the floor. "He's a little shy," Linda explained. "He's been through a lot. But he's a sweet kid. Loves to draw, loves animals. He just needs some stability and patience." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "We'll give him all of that and more." After Linda left, Margaret showed Marcus to his room. It was the smallest bedroom, the one that had been used for storage. She had cleaned it out, painted it a neutral beige, bought a used bed frame and a dresser from Goodwill. There were no decorations on the walls, no personal touches. It looked like a room in a budget motel. By contrast, Ethan and Aaron's rooms were shrines to their interests. Sports posters, gaming systems, shelves full of books and trophies. Their rooms felt lived in, loved, curated over years. "Here you are," Margaret said, setting Marcus's backpack on the bed. "Why don't you unpack and get settled? Dinner is in an hour. Do you like spaghetti?" Marcus nodded. "Great. There's a bathroom right across the hall. Make yourself at home." She left, closing the door behind her. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the empty room. He didn't unpack. He just sat there, small and silent, in a house that would never feel like home. Downstairs, Margaret found David in the kitchen. "How's he doing?" David asked. "Quiet, sir. But that's to be expected. He just needs time to adjust." "Where are the boys?" "In their rooms. I told them to give Marcus some space." David nodded, but there was something in his expression, a flicker of doubt. "This is going to be an adjustment for all of us." "It'll be fine," Margaret said with the forced optimism she usually reserved for difficult clients. "We're doing a good thing." But good intentions are not the same as good outcomes. And in the Whitmore household, what looked like charity from the outside would reveal itself to be something far more complicated and far more damaging. The differences started small. So small that if you weren't looking for them, you might not notice at all. But Marcus noticed. Children always notice. Dinner that first night was spaghetti as promised. The family gathered around the dining room table, a ritual the Whitmores maintained even in their busy lives. Margaret believed in family dinners. She had read articles about their importance. The twins sat on one side of the table, Marcus on the other. David sat at the head, Margaret at the foot. "So Marcus," Margaret began as she served the pasta, "tell us a little about yourself. What grade will you be in?" "Second," Marcus said quietly. "Second grade. That's wonderful. Are you excited for school?" Marcus shrugged. "He's not much of a talker, is he?" Aaron said. "Aaron, be nice," Margaret chided, but gently. "Marcus is just getting comfortable. These things take time." The conversation moved on to the twins' summer activities. Ethan had a soccer tournament coming up. Aaron was attending a coding camp. Margaret asked them questions, encouraged them to elaborate, praised their achievements. David chimed in with paternal pride. Marcus ate his spaghetti and said nothing. No one asked him follow-up questions. No one drew him into the conversation. He had been acknowledged at the beginning, and that was apparently sufficient. After dinner, the twins were excused to play video games in the basement. Marcus started to follow them. "Marcus, honey, you need to help clear the table," Margaret called. Marcus stopped. "They're not clearing? The boys have chores later. Right now, I need you to bring your plate to the kitchen." It was a small thing. Reasonable even. But it established a pattern. The twins' time was valuable, their activities prioritized. Marcus's time was available, his labor assumed. Over the following weeks, these small differences accumulated. The twins had name-brand clothes. Marcus got his from Target clearance racks. The twins had the latest phones. Marcus had none. The twins had birthday parties with friends from school. Marcus's birthday passed with a grocery store cake and no guests. "We're not made of money," Margaret explained to David when he questioned some of these choices. "We're already stretching our budget with another child in the house. Marcus has what he needs. The boys have earned some extras through their hard work and achievements." But it wasn't about money. The Whitmores could afford to treat all three boys equally. It was about something deeper, something Margaret couldn't quite articulate because she had never fully examined it. In her mind there was a hierarchy. Ethan and Aaron were hers, blood of her blood, the children she had carried and birthed and raised from infancy. Marcus was a foster child, a temporary addition, someone she was helping out of obligation and virtue. She didn't hate Marcus. She didn't even dislike him. But she didn't love him the way she loved her sons, and that difference manifested in 1,000 small ways. David noticed but said nothing. He was conflict-averse by nature, and Margaret managed the household. He told himself it wasn't his place to intervene, that Margaret knew what she was doing, that fostering was complicated and he should trust her judgment. This is how injustice perpetuates itself. Not through dramatic acts of cruelty, but through small compromises, through silence, through the path of least resistance. The twins noticed too, and they understood the implicit message. Marcus was less than. He was other. He didn't deserve the same consideration they did. Children are exceptionally attuned to hierarchy. They understand instinctively where they rank in the family system, and they learn quickly how to navigate and exploit that ranking. Ethan and Aaron began to test boundaries. "Marcus, go get my phone from upstairs," Ethan would say. "Get it yourself," Marcus would respond. "Mom, Marcus isn't listening to me." Margaret would intervene. "Marcus, honey, if Ethan asked you to help him, please just do it. We all help each other in this family." But it was never reciprocal. The twins never fetched things for Marcus. They never helped him with anything unless explicitly instructed to do so by their parents. At school, the dynamics were even more pronounced. Ethan and Aaron were popular, athletic, socially dominant. Marcus was the small, quiet kid who wore clothes that didn't quite fit and whose lunch came from free meal program. The twins didn't defend him when other kids made fun of him. They didn't include him in their social circles. At home, they could pretend a kind of coexistence. At school, they ignored him entirely. "Why don't you boys include Marcus sometimes?" Margaret asked one evening. "He doesn't have many friends yet. Mom, we're in middle school. He's in elementary school." "It would be weird," Ethan explained. "Yeah, and it's not like he's really our brother," Aaron added. Margaret frowned. "He's your foster brother? While he's living with us, he's part of this family." "But he's not actually family," Aaron persisted. "You said he might go back to his real mom someday." Margaret didn't know how to respond to that. It was true that foster placements were often temporary, that the goal was usually reunification. But she had also promised Marcus stability, belonging. She felt caught between two narratives, unable to fully commit to either. "Just be kind to him," she finally said. "That's all I'm asking." But kindness without equality is just another form of condescension. And the twins understood, perhaps better than their mother, that they had been given permission to maintain the hierarchy as long as they weren't overtly cruel. Marcus had been with the Whitmores for 8 months when the physical abuse started. It began, as these things often do, with what could be dismissed as roughhousing. The twins were in the basement playing video games. Marcus, lonely and seeking connection, came downstairs to watch. "Can I play?" he asked. "No," Aaron said without looking away from the screen. "We're in the middle of a campaign." Marcus sat on the couch anyway, watching the game. After a few minutes, Ethan paused the game and turned to him. "Dude, we said we're busy. Go somewhere else." "I'm not bothering you. I'm just watching." "You're being annoying," Aaron said. "Leave." "No." What happened next would be described differently depending on who was telling the story. The twins would later claim that Marcus had attacked Ethan, that they were defending themselves. Margaret, who heard the commotion from upstairs, would never be entirely sure what to believe. What is certain is this: Ethan grabbed Marcus by the arm and tried to physically remove him from the basement. Marcus resisted. Aaron joined in. And in the scuffle, Marcus ended up on the floor with a bloody nose. Margaret rushed downstairs to find Marcus crying, blood streaming from his nose, while the twins stood over him. "What happened?" she demanded. "He attacked Ethan," Aaron said quickly. "We had to defend ourselves." "I didn't attack anyone," Marcus sobbed. "I just wanted to watch them play. They threw me down." Margaret looked between them, trying to assess the truth. Marcus was smaller, younger. But he was also the newcomer, the unknown variable. Her sons were telling a different story, and there were 2 of them. Majority rule. "Boys, go to your rooms," she said to the twins. Then to Marcus, "Let's get you cleaned up." In the bathroom, she held a cold cloth to Marcus's nose and made soothing sounds. But she didn't promise to punish the twins. She didn't take Marcus's side unequivocally. "Honey, I know adjusting to a new family is hard," she said. "But you can't go around starting fights with the boys. They're bigger than you. You could get hurt." "I didn't start anything," Marcus said, his voice small and defeated. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. But maybe give them some space when they're doing their own things, okay?" Marcus nodded, but something had broken in that moment. He had learned that his version of events didn't carry the same weight as the twins. He had learned that when it came down to it, he was alone. Margaret reported the incident to Linda Chin, the social worker, during her next monthly visit. She framed it as a minor scuffle, typical sibling rivalry. "They're still adjusting to each other," Margaret explained. "The boys are used to being just the 2 of them. Marcus is learning the family dynamics. I think it's pretty normal for kids to test boundaries." Linda made a note in her file. She asked to speak to Marcus alone, which was standard protocol. "How are things going, Marcus?" she asked gently. Marcus was sitting on his bed, in the room that had never stopped feeling temporary. "Okay," he said. "Your foster mom mentioned there was a little conflict with the twins. Do you want to tell me about that?" Marcus was 8 years old. He had already been in the system long enough to know the rules, spoken and unspoken. If he complained too much, he might be moved again. Another home, another school, another set of strangers. At least here he had his own room, regular meals, a place to sleep. "It was nothing," he said. "We just had a fight about video games." "Did they hurt you?" "I fell. It was an accident." Linda studied him. She had been a social worker for 15 years. She knew when children were hiding something. But she also knew that her caseload was overwhelming, that there were children in far more urgent situations, that the Whitmores were by all appearances a good placement. "You know you can tell me if something's wrong, right? If you don't feel safe?" "I'm fine," Marcus said. Linda made another note. She would keep an eye on this placement, but for now it didn't rise to the level of intervention. After she left, Margaret felt relieved. The incident had been documented, addressed, and filed away. They could move forward. But the twins had learned something important. They could hurt Marcus, and as long as they stuck to the same story, they would be believed. There were two of them and one of him. Math favored them. The abuse escalated gradually. A shove here, a pinch there, always in places that wouldn't leave obvious bruises. They learned to be careful around their parents, to maintain the facade of coexistence. But when they were alone with Marcus, they exercised their power. "You're worthless," Aaron would whisper. "Nobody wants you. That's why you're here." "Your real mom didn't even care enough to stay off drugs," Ethan would add. "That's how much you matter." Marcus would try to defend himself verbally, but words from an 8-year-old carry little weight against teenagers. He learned to stay quiet, to make himself small, to avoid being alone with the twins whenever possible. But in a house, in a family, there's no place to hide permanently. Margaret Whitmore was not an evil woman. This is important to understand. She was not a villain from a movie, cackling over her wicked plans. She was an ordinary person, flawed and complicated, capable of both kindness and tremendous harm. She loved her biological sons with the fierce, irrational love that parents have for their children. She had changed their diapers, nursed them through illnesses, celebrated their triumphs, consoled their defeats. They were woven into the fabric of her identity in a way that Marcus simply wasn't. With Marcus, she performed the duties of care. She fed him, clothed him, took him to school. But there was a distance, an emotional remove. She didn't see him as fully hers, and that affected everything. When teachers reported that Marcus seemed withdrawn at school, Margaret attributed it to his difficult background. "He's been through trauma," she told David. "The social worker warned us he might have attachment issues. We just need to be patient." When Marcus started having nightmares and wetting the bed, she took him to a therapist. But in the session she attended, she framed the problem as Marcus's alone, not as something potentially arising from his current environment. "He has abandonment issues from his mother," she explained to the therapist. "We're trying to provide stability, but he struggles with trust." The therapist, Dr. Sarah Klein, asked careful questions. "How are things at home? How does Marcus get along with your biological sons?" "They're adjusting," Margaret said. "The boys are very different ages, different interests. But they're respectful of each other." Dr. Klein made notes. She would have liked to spend more time with the family, to observe their dynamics directly. But her schedule was packed, and Margaret was presenting as engaged and concerned. Without clear red flags, there was only so much she could do. Meanwhile, the twins were learning to be more sophisticated in their cruelty. They understood that physical violence left evidence, so they refined their methods. They would wake Marcus up in the middle of the night, whispering threats through his door. They would hide his things, then watch him get in trouble for losing them. They would eat his snacks, break his few possessions, delete his saved games on the shared computer. These were the kinds of behaviors that could be dismissed as normal sibling conflict. When Margaret caught wind of them, she would give tepid punishments, taking away video game privileges for a day, assigning extra chores, but nothing that truly addressed the pattern. "Boys will be boys," David would say when Margaret expressed concern. "My brother and I fought constantly growing up. They'll grow out of it." This phrase, "boys will be boys," is one of the most dangerous in the English language. It excuses behavior that should be corrected. It normalizes cruelty as biological inevitability. It allows parents to abdicate responsibility. But not all conflict between siblings is created equal. There's a difference between two equals squabbling over resources and two powerful individuals targeting a vulnerable one. The Whitmore twins weren't fighting with Marcus. They were torturing him. And the fact that no one seemed to notice or care only emboldened them. By the time Marcus turned 9, he had developed a flat affect. He spoke rarely, smiled never. His teachers noted that he seemed depressed, that he struggled to focus, that he flinched when other children got too close. "He needs more therapy," Margaret told David after another call from the school. "Maybe he needs to go back into the system," David said quietly. "Maybe this isn't the right placement for him." Margaret felt a spike of defensiveness. "We made a commitment. We can't just give up on him." But her objection wasn't really about Marcus. It was about how giving up on Marcus would look. It would be an admission of failure, a blemish on her image as a compassionate foster parent. So they kept him, not because it was best for him, but because it was easiest for them. This is one of the cruelest paradoxes of foster care. Children can be trapped in harmful placements because the system prioritizes stability over safety, because adults prioritize their own egos over children's well-being, because everyone involved becomes invested in the fiction that everything is fine. Marcus knew it wasn't fine. But he was 9 years old and he had no power, no advocates, no way out. It started as a joke between the twins. They were in Aaron's room, scrolling through social media, when Ethan suggested they film one of their pranks on Marcus. "Come on, it would be hilarious," Ethan said. "We could post it. People do that shit all the time." "We'd get in trouble if Mom saw it," Aaron said, but his tone was more considering than refusing. "So we don't show Mom. We could make a private account just for us. Archive of the greatest hits." Aaron thought about it. There was something appealing about the idea, about having evidence of their dominance. They had been careful for so long hiding what they did from their parents. But what if they documented it just for themselves? What if they created a record of their power? "Okay," he said finally. "But we have to be smart about it." They started small. A video of them hiding Marcus's backpack and watching him panic before school. A clip of them putting salt in his orange juice and capturing his disgusted reaction. Nothing that would constitute clear evidence of abuse, just mean-spirited pranks that could be dismissed as harmless fun. But having the videos changed something. It made the abuse feel more real, more permanent. They could watch the clips over and over, reliving their moments of control. And with each viewing, their empathy eroded a little more. Marcus became less like a person and more like a character in a show they were producing. The videos got worse. A clip of them holding Marcus's head underwater in the bathtub, just long enough to terrify him. A video of them forcing him to eat dog food, threatening worse if he refused. A recording of them waking him in the middle of the night and making him do exercises until he collapsed from exhaustion. They were careful never to film anything that would leave lasting marks. They had learned from that early incident with the bloody nose. Visible injuries prompted questions. But fear, humiliation, psychological torture, these left wounds that were harder to see and easier to deny. By the time Marcus turned 10, he had given up resisting. He did whatever the twins told him to do. He had learned that resistance only made things worse, that the best strategy was to endure and hope they would get bored. But they didn't get bored. If anything, his compliance emboldened them. They started to see just how far they could push, what boundaries they could cross. "He's like completely broken," Aaron said one evening after a particularly brutal session where they had made Marcus stand in the corner for 3 hours while they watched movies. "I know," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice, not quite pride but not shame either. More like scientific curiosity. "It's kind of crazy how much he'll take." Neither of them considered that what they were doing was wrong. They had grown up in a household where Marcus was clearly positioned as inferior. Their parents' unequal treatment had given them permission, implicit but unmistakable, to treat him as less than human. And crucially, they had never faced real consequences for their behavior. The few times they had been caught, the punishments were minimal. They learned that they could get away with almost anything as long as they were strategic about it. This is how ordinary children become capable of extraordinary cruelty. Not through innate evil, but through environment, permission, and the absence of accountability. On May 14, 2019, Margaret Whitmore left for a 3-day real estate conference in Columbus. David was supposed to supervise the boys, but he had back-to-back meetings scheduled and would be working late all 3 days. "The twins are old enough to watch Marcus for a few hours," Margaret said when David expressed concern. "They're 16. They're responsible." David wasn't entirely comfortable with this arrangement, but Margaret had already paid for the conference, and they had hosted Marcus for 2 years without major incident. The background hum of concern he felt about the household dynamics had never quite risen to the level of action. "Just make sure they behave," he told the twins the morning Margaret left. "No parties, no trouble. Take care of your brother." "Foster brother," Aaron corrected automatically. David chose not to engage with that distinction. "Just be good." He left for work at 7:30. The twins watched his car disappear down the street, and then they turned to each other with matching grins. "We have the whole place to ourselves," Ethan said. Marcus, eating cereal at the kitchen table, felt his stomach drop. He had learned to read their expressions, to sense when they had something planned. The first day was relatively benign by their standards. They made Marcus do all the household chores while they played video games. They ate the food meant for his lunch. They locked him in his room for several hours. Marcus endured it all silently. He had learned that showing fear or pain only encouraged them. The best strategy was to become a ghost, to give them nothing. But on the second day something shifted. The twins were bored. They had exhausted their usual repertoire of torments, and Marcus's lack of reaction frustrated them. "Let's make him do something really humiliating," Ethan suggested. "Film it. Make it good." They debated ideas, each more degrading than the last, competing to come up with the most creative cruelty. In this moment, Marcus wasn't a 10-year-old child to them. He was a prop in a game they were playing, a toy to be broken. What they planned for that night, the specific acts they would force Marcus to perform, was so dehumanizing that even hardened prosecutors would struggle to describe it during the trial. The videos they filmed, which would eventually become evidence, would be sealed from public viewing, deemed too disturbing for general consumption. But Marcus didn't know it would stop. In that moment, in their basement, with the twins looming over him with their phones out, he thought this was his life now. He thought this would go on forever. So he made a decision. He would rather die than endure another second. When the twins got distracted, arguing over camera angles, Marcus ran. He bolted up the basement stairs faster than he had ever moved, his small body fueled by pure survival instinct. He made it to the back door, wrenched it open, and ran into the woods behind the house. It was nearly dark. The conservation area stretched for miles, dense with trees and underbrush. Marcus ran without direction, without a plan, driven only by the need to escape. The twins realized he was gone and panicked. This wasn't part of the game. If Marcus told someone, if he showed someone the bruises they had left, they would be in real trouble. "We have to find him," Aaron said, his voice high with fear. They grabbed flashlights and went after him. Marcus could hear them crashing through the woods behind him, calling his name. He tried to run faster, but his legs were short and he was exhausted from 2 days of abuse. He tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping his hands and knees. He tried to get up, but they were on him. "You little shit," Ethan hissed, grabbing him by the arm. "You're not going anywhere." What happened next, in those dark woods, was the subject of extensive investigation and debate during the trial. The prosecution argued it was premeditated murder, that the twins made a conscious decision to silence Marcus permanently. The defense claimed it was a tragic accident, a result of panic and poor judgment. What is certain is this: Marcus Thompson, age 10, died that night in the woods behind 847 Meadowbrook Lane. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. There were signs of a struggle. And on the twins' phones, found 3 days later during the investigation, was a video. Not of the murder itself, but of the events leading up to it. Evidence of a pattern of abuse that had been building for years. The twins returned to the house without Marcus. They cleaned themselves up, deleted what they thought were all the incriminating videos, not realizing that cloud backup would preserve them, and went to bed. When David came home late that night, he assumed Marcus was asleep. He didn't check on him. He had never been in the habit of checking on Marcus. It wasn't until the next morning, when Marcus didn't come down for breakfast, that David went to his room and found it empty. The Franklin County Sheriff's Department treated Marcus's disappearance as a missing child case initially. They searched the house, the neighborhood, interviewed the twins. Ethan and Aaron, coached by their parents' lawyer who arrived within hours, claimed Marcus had run away after an argument. What was the argument about? Detective Lisa Matthews asked. "He wanted to play our video games," Ethan said. "We said no. He got mad and left." "What time was this?" "Around 7, I think. It was getting dark." "And you didn't think to call your father? Or go after him?" The twins exchanged a glance. "We thought he'd come back. He's done it before, gone off to sulk." This was a lie, but without evidence to the contrary, the police had to accept it. They organized search parties, brought in K-9 units, distributed flyers. Margaret, back from her conference, appeared on local news, pleading for Marcus's safe return. She looked the part of the devastated mother. And perhaps she was genuinely upset in her way. But there was also performance in her grief, a awareness of how she needed to appear. It was a dog handler who found Marcus's body 3 days later, partially concealed under leaves and branches. The scene was staged to look like an accident, like Marcus had fallen and hit his head. But the forensic evidence told a different story. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the medical examiner, noted multiple injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. There were bruises in various stages of healing, suggesting ongoing abuse. There were defensive wounds on Marcus's hands. And the position of the body, the pattern of injuries, all pointed to homicide. Detective Matthews obtained warrants for the twins' phones and computers. What she found would become the foundation of the prosecution's case. Months of videos documenting systematic abuse, text messages between the twins discussing their plans, search histories that revealed they had been researching how to hide evidence of violence. The arrest happened at school. Ethan and Aaron Whitmore were taken out of their geometry class in handcuffs, charged with first-degree murder. The shock rippled through Franklin County. These were not the kind of boys people expected to commit murder. They were white, affluent, well-spoken, college-bound. They looked like everyone's sons. The media descended on the story with voracious appetite. A black foster child, dead at the hands of his white foster brothers. The racial dynamics, which had been subtext in the household dynamics, became text in the national conversation. Was this a hate crime? A CNN anchor asked. The evidence suggests a pattern of dehumanization, a legal analyst responded. Whether that crosses the threshold of a hate crime in the legal sense is something the prosecutors will have to determine. But the racism in the Whitmore household had been more insidious than overt slurs or explicit bias. It was in the casual assumption that Marcus's life mattered less, that his pain was less significant, that his presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. It was in the way Margaret had decided, unconsciously but unmistakably, that this black child did not deserve the same love and resources as her white sons. And it was in the way the twins had absorbed this message and acted on it with escalating cruelty. The trial began in late July and lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Robert Henderson, built a methodical case. They presented the videos, which even in edited form were difficult to watch. They called teachers who testified about Marcus's declining mental state. They brought in Dr. Klein, the therapist, who acknowledged in hindsight that there had been warning signs she had missed. "I didn't want to see it," she admitted on the stand, tears in her eyes. "I wanted to believe the placement was working because the alternative, that this child was suffering in my patient files while I did nothing, was too painful to accept." The defense, led by Martin Keller, a seasoned criminal attorney, argued that this was a case of teenagers who had made a terrible mistake, not cold-blooded murderers. They emphasized the twins' youth, their lack of criminal history, the possibility for rehabilitation. "These are children," Keller said in his opening statement. 16 years old. Yes, they did something unthinkable. Yes, Marcus Thompson's death is a tragedy. But charging them as adults seeking life without parole, that's not justice. That's vengeance. He tried to paint a picture of a chaotic household where everyone, including the twins, was struggling with the foster placement. He suggested that Margaret and David's parenting failures had created an environment where the tragedy could occur. The jury, 8 women and 4 men, a racial mix reflective of Franklin County's demographics, listened intently. This was not an easy case for any of them. Margaret Whitmore was called to testify. She took the stand wearing a conservative navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back, her makeup minimal. She looked like a woman destroyed by grief. "Mrs. Whitmore," the prosecutor began, "how would you describe your relationship with Marcus?" "I loved him," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried so hard to give him a good home." "Did you treat Marcus the same as you treated your biological sons?" Margaret hesitated. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that forced her to confront truths she had been avoiding for years. I tried to. But it was complicated. Ethan and Aaron, I'd had them since birth. Marcus came to us when he was 7. The bonding was different. I thought love would come with time. Did it? Another pause. I don't know. I cared about him. I wanted him to be safe and happy. But I don't know if I loved him the way I should have. This admission, this rare moment of honesty, would be quoted in every news article about the trial. It was both damning and sympathetic. Margaret Whitmore was not a monster, but she was complicit. Her failure to love equally had created the conditions for Marcus's death. David Whitmore testified next. He was more circumspect, more defended. He admitted he had noticed tensions in the household but had deferred to Margaret on parenting decisions. He claimed ignorance of the extent of the twins' abuse. "Did you ever see your sons hurt Marcus?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Did you ever see bruises on Marcus?" Maybe once or twice. He was an active kid. Kids get bruises." "Did you ask him how he got those bruises?" "I don't remember specifically." "So you saw evidence that this child might be injured, and you didn't investigate?" "I assumed if something was seriously wrong, Margaret would handle it. She was home more than I was." This answer, this abdication of responsibility, encapsulated David's role in the tragedy. He had not actively harmed Marcus, but his willful blindness, his refusal to ask difficult questions, had been its own form of neglect. The twins did not testify in their own defense. Their lawyers advised against it, knowing that the prosecution would use any statement to undermine their case for rehabilitation. But the video spoke for them. Jurors watched hours of footage showing the twins' cruelty, their laughter as Marcus suffered, their complete lack of empathy. In one particularly damning clip, filmed just days before Marcus's death, Aaron looked directly into the camera and said, "This is what happens when you're weak." The jury took 3 days to deliberate. When they returned, they found both Ethan and Aaron Whitmore guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks later. This is where Judge Morrison would have discretion. Ohio law allowed for life without parole for juveniles in extreme cases, but it was rare. The judge would need to consider the nature of the crime, the defendant's character, their likelihood of rehabilitation, and the impact on the community. Shanice Thompson, Marcus's aunt, gave a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. "Marcus was a child," she said, her voice steady despite her pain. "A sweet, gentle child who liked to draw pictures of animals and dreamed of being a veterinarian. He didn't deserve what happened to him. He deserved a family that loved him. Instead, he got people who saw him as less than human because of the color of his skin and because he wasn't their blood. My sister, Marcus's mother, she has her demons. She's struggling with addiction. But she loved her son. She would have never let him suffer like this. We tried to get custody, but the system said the Whitmores were better. They were stable, they were middle class, they looked the part. And now Marcus is dead because no one was willing to see what was really happening in that house." She looked directly at the twins. "I don't know if you can change. I don't know if you'll ever understand what you took from this world. But I know that Marcus deserved justice, and I'm asking this court to give it to him." The defense presented expert testimony about adolescent brain development, about how 16-year-olds lack the judgment and impulse control of adults, about how the twins could be rehabilitated with proper intervention. But then came the moment that would define the trial. As Judge Morrison prepared to announce her decision, as the courtroom held its collective breath, Aaron Whitmore turned to his brother and smirked. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but the photographer caught it. That photograph would be on the front page of every major newspaper the next day. Judge Morrison saw it too. She paused, removed her glasses, and looked at the twins for a long moment. "In my 2 decades on this bench," she began, and delivered the speech that opened this story. The speech that ended with life without parole for both twins. The courtroom erupted. Margaret Whitmore collapsed. David sat in stunned silence. The twins showed no emotion. And Shanice Thompson, standing in the back, whispered, "Thank you." In the weeks following the sentencing, the national conversation exploded. Pundits on the left praised Judge Morrison for recognizing the severity of the crime and the racial dynamics at play. Pundits on the right criticized her for being too harsh on juvenile offenders, for potentially denying the twins a chance at redemption. Life without parole for 16-year-olds is essentially a death sentence, a criminal justice reform advocate argued on a cable news show. We know from neuroscience that the teenage brain is still developing. We know that people can change. This sentence forecloses any possibility of that. But these weren't typical teenagers making a mistake, another commentator responded. They tortured a child for years. They filmed it. They showed no remorse. At what point do we say that some acts are so heinous that they warrant permanent consequences? The debate revealed deep fault lines in American society. Questions about race, about foster care, about juvenile justice, about the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. There were no easy answers. Margaret and David Whitmore's lives imploded. Margaret lost her real estate license. David was asked to resign from his position. They divorced within a year. Margaret moved to another state, changed her name, and tried to disappear. David stayed in Ohio but became a recluse, unable to face the community that once celebrated him. In interviews with a local journalist, conducted months after the trial, Margaret finally spoke more candidly about her failures. "I wanted to be the kind of person who fosters," she said, her eyes hollow. "I wanted the credit for being generous, for helping. But I didn't want to do the actual work of loving a child who wasn't mine. I see that now. Marcus deserved a mother who loved him unconditionally, and I couldn't be that for him. I told myself it was because he was a foster child, that the situation was complicated. But the truth is I made a choice. I chose my biological sons over him, every day in 1,000 small ways. And those choices killed him." This honesty, too late to save Marcus but perhaps not too late to prevent future tragedies, was the closest thing to redemption Margaret would achieve. The Whitmore case prompted reforms in Ohio's foster care system. New protocols were implemented for monitoring placements, for training foster parents about implicit bias and equal treatment, for giving children more avenues to report abuse. "Marcus's death cannot be in vain," said State Representative Karen Mitchell, who championed the reforms. "We have to do better. We have to see foster children as children first, deserving of the same love and protection we give our biological children. But reforms are only as good as their implementation. And the foster care system, overwhelmed and underfunded, continued to place children in homes that range from adequate to harmful. Ethan and Aaron Whitmore were sent to separate maximum security prisons. Ohio doesn't have a dedicated facility for juvenile lifers, so they were placed in adult populations with some protective measures. Prison is a brutal environment for anyone, but especially for young offenders. The twins, who had wielded power so confidently in their own home, found themselves at the bottom of a different hierarchy. Inmates don't look kindly on those who harm children. Ethan struggled more visibly. He got into fights, spent time in solitary confinement, developed depression. In a letter to his mother, which she did not respond to, he wrote, "I didn't think I would end up here. I didn't think it was that serious. Marcus was just a foster kid. I didn't understand that made it worse, not better." This statement, self-pitying and still missing the fundamental point, revealed that even in prison, even after conviction, Ethan had not fully grasped the humanity of his victim. Aaron adapted better to prison life. He kept his head down, avoided trouble, read voraciously. In a conversation with a prison psychologist, he said something that suggested a deeper, if incomplete, reckoning. "I think about Marcus every day," he said. "I wonder who he would have become. I stole that from him. I stole everything from him. My lawyer talked about rehabilitation, about how I could change. But how do you rehabilitate someone who did what I did? I don't think there's enough time in any sentence to make up for taking a child's life." Whether this represented genuine remorse or just a more sophisticated understanding of how to present himself was impossible to determine. Remorse, like love, is difficult to measure. The question of whether the twins deserved life without parole, whether they could have been rehabilitated, whether there was value in permanent punishment versus potential redemption, these questions remained contested. Some argued that the brain science was clear. Teenagers are not fully formed, they can change, and life without parole denied that possibility. Others argued that some acts are so depraved that they warrant permanent consequences regardless of age, that society needs to send a message that certain lines cannot be crossed without forfeiting your future. Both perspectives had merit. Both perspectives had limitations. The Whitmore case became a touchstone in discussions about foster care, about how we value children differently based on their circumstances and their race. Studies have shown that children of color in foster care receive fewer services, less attention, and less investment than white children. They are more likely to be placed in institutional settings rather than family homes. They are less likely to be adopted. The reasons for these disparities are complex: systemic racism, economic inequalities, implicit bias among social workers and judges and foster families. But the result is that children like Marcus face additional barriers, additional vulnerabilities. "We don't value all children equally in this country," said Dr. Jennifer Santos, a sociologist who studies child welfare. "We say we do. We have policies that claim to. But when you look at outcomes, at resource allocation, at who gets adopted and who ages out of the system, the disparities are stark." Marcus Thompson's death is an extreme case, but the devaluation he experienced, that happens in less dramatic ways to thousands of foster children every day. The case also forced a conversation about how we identify and address abuse in foster homes. Social workers are overworked and undertrained. Home visits are infrequent and often scheduled in advance, giving families time to create a facade of normalcy. Children are asked about abuse in the presence of their foster parents, creating obvious barriers to disclosure. "The system is designed to keep children in placements unless there's clear evidence of harm," said Linda Chin, the social worker who had overseen Marcus's placement. "But clear evidence often comes too late. By the time bruises are visible, by the time a child is willing to disclose, significant damage has been done. We need to shift to a model that's more preventative, that gives children more power and voice." Chin left social work after Marcus's death. She couldn't reconcile staying in a system she had lost faith in. Her departure was a loss. Experienced social workers are hard to replace, but also understandable. How do you continue doing work when you feel complicit in a child's death? The smirk that Aaron gave his brother in the courtroom became one of the most discussed moments of the trial. What did it mean? Was it nervousness manifesting as inappropriate affect? Was it genuine contempt? Was it the last gasp of two boys who still didn't fully comprehend the gravity of their situation? Juries and judges and the public want to see remorse. We want offenders to demonstrate that they understand the harm they've caused, that they feel appropriate guilt. Remorse is seen as the first step toward rehabilitation. But the twins showed no remorse during the trial. They sat stone-faced as prosecutors described their crimes. They showed no emotion as Marcus's aunt wept. They smirked as they faced life imprisonment. This absence of remorse, more than anything else, convinced Judge Morrison and much of the public that they were beyond rehabilitation. But remorse is complicated. Teenagers, especially those with developing brains and limited emotional intelligence, may not be capable of the kind of deep, reflective remorse that adults expect. They may understand intellectually that they did something wrong without feeling the appropriate emotional response. Or, in the twins' case, they may have been so thoroughly socialized to see Marcus as less than human that they genuinely didn't grasp why his death should matter. Dehumanization is a powerful psychological mechanism. Once you've been taught to see someone as fundamentally other, as not quite human, it becomes difficult to access empathy for them. The twins had spent years dehumanizing Marcus with their parents' implicit blessing. That psychological damage couldn't be undone in a courtroom. Years later, in separate interviews with a criminal psychologist studying juvenile offenders, both twins were asked what they would say to Marcus if they could. Ethan said, "I'd tell him I'm sorry. That I was young and stupid and didn't understand what I was doing." Aaron said, "I'd tell him he deserved better. That he deserved a family that loved him. That I robbed him of his life and there's no excuse for that." Were these statements genuine? Had they developed real remorse or had they simply learned what they were supposed to say? The psychologist couldn't determine with certainty. Remorse, like so much of human psychology, is opaque even to those feeling it. Marcus Thompson's death illuminated the deep flaws in America's foster care system. On any given day, there are approximately 400,000 children in foster care in the United States. They have been removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, parental incarceration, or parental death. The system is supposed to provide safety and stability for these vulnerable children. But in practice, it often fails them in profound ways. Foster children are more likely to experience abuse in care than children in the general population. They are moved frequently, disrupting their education and relationships. They age out of the system at 18 with minimal support, leading to high rates of homelessness, unemployment, and incarceration among former foster youth. And children of color, like Marcus, face additional challenges. They are overrepresented in the foster care system, underrepresented in adoptive placements, and more likely to experience negative outcomes. "The system is designed by people who have never been through it," said Maria Rodriguez, a former foster youth who now advocates for system reform. "Social workers mean well, but they're overwhelmed. Foster parents, some are wonderful, but others are in it for the wrong reasons. For the stipend, for the tax breaks, for the image. And the children, we have no power. We're moved around like furniture. Our opinions don't matter. Our feelings don't matter. We're supposed to be grateful for whatever we get." Marcus Thompson was supposed to be grateful for the Whitmores. He was supposed to appreciate that they took him in, gave him a room, fed him, clothed him. The fact that they didn't love him, that they treated him as inferior to their biological sons, that they enabled his abuse, these things were supposed to be secondary to the fact that he had a placement at all. But children need more than just material provision. They need love, safety, belonging. Marcus had none of these things, and the system failed to notice or intervene. The role of race. It's impossible to discuss the Whitmore case without addressing race. Marcus was black. The twins were white. This fact shaped everything about the case, even if it was never explicitly named in the household. Margaret Whitmore would likely have denied being racist. She would have pointed to her decision to foster a black child as evidence of her open-mindedness. She probably voted for Barack Obama. She probably had black colleagues and acquaintances. But racism is not just about conscious animus. It's about the subtle, often unconscious ways that we devalue people of color, that we see them as less deserving of care and empathy. Margaret never bonded with Marcus the way she bonded with her biological sons. Was that because he was a foster child or because he was a black child? The two factors are impossible to disentangle. Would she have bonded more easily with a white foster child? Probably. The twins absorbed their parents' subtle racism and amplified it. The ways they talked to Marcus, the things they made him do, the extent of their cruelty, all of it was shaped by their perception of him as fundamentally other. When white families foster children of color, they need to do more than just open their homes, said Dr. Kimberly Jones, an expert in transracial adoption and fostering. They need to actively work to understand racism, to confront their own biases, to connect their foster children with their cultural communities. Love is not colorblind. These children need families who see them fully and completely, including their racial identity. The Whitmores did none of this. They didn't talk about race. They didn't help Marcus develop a positive sense of his identity. They probably thought they were doing the right thing by not seeing color. But not seeing color means not seeing the child. It means not understanding the specific challenges they face, the specific support they need. This is the question that haunts everyone involved in the case. At what point could someone have intervened? At what point could Marcus have been saved? The social workers missed signs. The teachers missed signs. The therapist missed signs. Marcus's aunt, who had wanted custody but been deemed less stable than the Whitmores, missed signs because she wasn't given access to him. But the clearest failure was Margaret and David's. They lived with Marcus. They saw him every day. They could have chosen to love him equally, to treat him fairly, to protect him from their sons. They didn't. I think about it constantly, David said in his interview. All the moments when I could have intervened. When I could have asked more questions, insisted on answers. I told myself Margaret was handling it. I told myself the boys were just being boys. I told myself I didn't want to create conflict. Every one of those choices, every one of those moments of cowardice, led to Marcus's death. I have to live with that. Margaret's reflections were similar. I chose comfort over courage. I chose my biological sons over my foster son. I chose appearance over substance. I thought fostering would make me look good, would make me feel good about myself. I never considered what Marcus actually needed from me, which was unconditional love. And when it became clear that the placement wasn't working, I should have admitted that and let Marcus go to a family that could truly love him. But I didn't want to admit failure. So I kept him there, in a home where he was suffering because of my ego. That's the truth I have to face. These admissions, painful and honest, represent a form of accountability. But they came too late for Marcus. Judge Morrison's decision to sentence the twins to life without parole was controversial. Juvenile justice advocates argued that it violated the spirit, if not the letter, of Supreme Court rulings that limited life without parole for juveniles. But Judge Morrison defended her decision in a written opinion that accompanied the sentencing. The Supreme Court has held that life without parole for juveniles should be rare, reserved for those whose crimes reflect permanent incorrigibility, she wrote. In this case, I find that standard met. The defendants did not commit a single act of violence in a moment of poor judgment. They engaged in a sustained, calculated campaign of torture against a vulnerable child. They documented their abuse, suggesting pride rather than shame. And even in the face of the most severe consequences, they showed no remorse. While I acknowledge that 16-year-olds are different from adults in important ways, I also must acknowledge that these particular 16-year-olds committed an act of such profound cruelty that they forfeited their right to eventual freedom. Whether you agree with this reasoning depends on your philosophy of justice. If you believe justice is primarily about punishment and protection, punishing wrongdoers and protecting society from them, then life without parole makes sense for a crime this severe. If you believe justice is primarily about rehabilitation and redemption, giving offenders the chance to change and eventually rejoin society, then life without parole for 16-year-olds seems excessively harsh and counterproductive. Most people fall somewhere in between, believing that justice requires both accountability and the possibility of redemption. The Whitmore case tests the limits of that middle position. Can someone who tortured a child be redeemed? Should they be given the chance? There are no easy answers. If there is anything constructive to take from this tragedy, it's lessons for current and prospective foster families. First, examine your motivations. Why do you want to foster? If the answer includes words like giving back or helping less fortunate children, interrogate that further. Foster children are not charity cases. They are children who deserve families, not saviors. Second, commit to equal treatment. This doesn't mean treating foster and biological children identically. Their needs may be different. But it means according them equal value, equal love, equal investment. If you can't do this, don't foster. Third, educate yourself about trauma, attachment, and racial identity. Foster children come from hard places. They need parents who understand trauma-informed care, who won't take behaviors personally, who can provide consistent safety and support. And if you're fostering across racial lines, you need to actively work to support your child's racial identity. Fourth, believe children when they disclose abuse. Take reports seriously. Investigate thoroughly. Don't assume that your biological children are more credible than your foster children. Fifth, be willing to admit when a placement isn't working. Not every match is successful. Sometimes the healthiest thing for everyone is to acknowledge that and allow the child to move to a better fit. This is not failure. Failure is keeping a child in a harmful situation because you don't want to admit defeat. I wish someone had told me these things, Margaret said in her interview. I wish someone had made me really examine why I wanted to foster, what I was capable of providing. I went into it thinking my good intentions were enough. They weren't. Marcus Thompson died on May 16, 2019. He was 10 years old. He loved animals and drawing. He wanted to be a veterinarian. He never got the chance to grow up, to discover who he might become, to experience the joys and sorrows of a full life. His death was not inevitable. It was the result of choices. Margaret's choice to foster without fully committing, David's choice to look away, the twins' choice to torture rather than protect, the system's choice to prioritize placement stability over child safety. Every one of those choices could have been different. And if they had been, Marcus might still be alive. In the years since his death, Shanice Thompson has become an advocate for foster care reform. She speaks at conferences, testifies before state legislatures, and pushes for changes that might prevent future tragedies. My nephew's life mattered, she says in every speech. Not because of how he died, but because of who he was. He was a child who deserved love and safety. Every foster child deserves that. We need to stop treating foster care as a charity project and start treating it as a fundamental human rights issue. These are children. They are not less valuable because they're not being raised by their biological parents. They are not less deserving because they've experienced trauma. They are children, and they deserve everything we would want for our own children. This message, simple but profound, is the legacy that Shanice is trying to build from Marcus's death. The Whitmore twins remain in prison. They will likely die there. Whether they have achieved genuine remorse, whether they are fundamentally different from the 16-year-olds who killed Marcus, whether they deserve a chance at redemption, these questions remain unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. But the questions themselves matter. They force us to think about justice, about childhood, about the capacity for change. They force us to examine our own biases, our own failures, our own complicity in systems that harm vulnerable children. As I close this account of Marcus Thompson's life and death, I'm struck by how preventable this tragedy was. Not inevitable. Not the result of uncontrollable forces. Preventable. If Margaret had examined her motivations more honestly, if David had been willing to confront uncomfortable truths, if the social workers had been given the time and resources to monitor placements more effectively, if the teachers had pushed harder when they noticed Marcus's decline, if the therapist had trusted her instincts, if the twins had been held accountable for early acts of cruelty, if a 10-year-old boy is dead because too many people made too many small decisions that prioritized comfort over courage, appearance over substance, silence over action. And he is not alone. Marcus's story is extreme, but the dynamics that killed him, inequality within families, the devaluation of foster children, racism, the willingness to look away from uncomfortable truths, these dynamics play out in less dramatic ways in countless homes. How many foster children are living right now in homes where they are treated as less than? How many are experiencing abuse that adults are rationalizing away? How many will we fail before we commit to systemic change? These are the questions Marcus's death demands we answer. I hope this account has made you uncomfortable. I hope it has made you question assumptions you might hold about family, about foster care, about children. I hope it has made you think about how you would respond if you saw a child being treated unequally, being abused, being devalued. Because ultimately, Marcus Thompson's death is not just about one family in Ohio. It's about all of us, about the kind of society we want to be, about how we treat the most vulnerable among us. We can do better. We must do better. For Marcus. For the hundreds of thousands of children currently in foster care. For the ones who will enter the system tomorrow. They deserve families who truly love them. They deserve a system that truly protects them. They deserve justice. And they deserve to be remembered not just as victims or case numbers, but as children with dreams and potential and infinite worth. Marcus Thompson wanted to be a veterinarian. He never got the chance. But we can honor his memory by fighting to ensure that other foster children do get their chances, that they are loved and protected and allowed to grow into whoever they might become. That is the only justice that matters now.